Okay, good morning. It's 10:40. All right. Everyone had a nice weekend? We all seem to be like post-flu. We're all feeling good. Yeah. It's warm outside. Spring is coming. It's New York. Good days, right? All right. A couple administrative matters. Some of you have asked about practice questions, review sessions, and things of that sort. I'll probably hold a review session before the final in April. I will post a practice question maybe this coming weekend that we can discuss next week before spring break. I might try to find a multiple choice question, somewhere. But for that, you pretty much, I think, should be just fine if you study the practice questions in the casebook. Those might even be overkill. It's going to be pretty straightforward. We can talk more about that maybe at the review session in April, but I don't think you should stress too much about the multiple choice. I mainly just want to see that you understand some basic rules. The essay questions are going to be, one or two questions will be trickier, so I want to make sure you have a chance to kind of see what one might look like, so that's why we'll do maybe a practice question next week. I encourage you to try and write out an answer. That always helps. See where you're at. Okay, so what other administrative stuff? All right, so this week we plan to finish section 12 and start the what I think is more interesting questions around what is a security. But before we do that, before we go back into civil procedure of securities law, I always love to get the sort of deluge of weekend emails, which is really fun from all of you. And some of you have mentioned that you sort of like real-world examples, which is great. I like the real world, too. So let's talk about a few of them. And I think this is actually really important because articles like Matt Levine's article from February 23rd, entitled "Can Kardashians Trade on Tweets?" is not only like perfect for an exam, but he even asks law professors to write an exam using this hypothetical. So this is really fun. So this is almost like a practice question. All right. So let's just reiterate the facts. Who can give the facts of the case? Nobody? Well, I know at least one of you sent me the article. Can someone give the facts of the Kylie Kardashian Snap Inc. tweet? Yes, sir.
I think she just posted, I think she tweeted saying something like, "I never look at Snap anymore," and then Snap's market cap went down like 1.3 billion.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh my God, I never look at Snap anymore. Okay. So, yeah. So that did it. So that was bad. Okay. So who wants to analyze? So let's say that's the hypothetical. Okay. So this is like a practice question before your practice question. Honestly, this is a fun one. So I might just like copy and change a few facts. So someone who would like to tell us whether Kylie may be held liable for any violation of the securities laws, and if so, what might be the bases for liability? If you are a disgruntled Snap investor, let me just tee this up a little bit more, you bought the stock the day before Kylie's tweet, and you saw, in the aggregate, $1.3 billion of market value wiped out in a day, and that was your retirement, or whatever, I don't know, you needed that, you thought you were going to make money buying Snap. Can you bring a lawsuit against Kylie or against Snap, or who can you sue and on what basis? Who wants to try a little preview of the end of April? Who wants to just give me One basis of liability, or you think there are none. And if you think there are none, why? No volunteers? Yes, in the back. I don't think
I'm not, it's Antonia. I'm actually not necessarily volunteering, but it would be helpful if you could,
Not volunteering, okay.
if you could just clarify, like I don't really follow the Kardashians, I try not to.
Neither do I.
So if you can just clarify what the actual instance was, that would be helpful.
Lucas, you want to tell us more about Kylie's? That's all he knows. Look at this. We all disclaim knowledge of the Kardashians so quickly. All right. Well, okay. So Kylie Jenner. Yeah, come on, someone. Yes. There we go. Come on. This is easy. Yeah.
I openly really like the Kardashians.
Here we go. Come on. I watch the Kardashians sometimes. You know, it's entertaining. Like when you don't want to think. Yeah. Go ahead.
So, Kylie Jenner just had a baby, which isn't really relevant to this, but important for people to know. Travis Scott.
The things you learn in SecReg, right? The things you learn. Okay. Yeah, Stormy.
So,
Great.
Kylie Jenner isn't getting paid by Snapchat. People don't think, although Snapchat says sometimes it does sign contracts with big celebrities to make sure that they produce content. But so far as we know, Kylie isn't getting paid. And Snapchat recently completely redesigned its app. It used to be one way, and now things are all rearranged. And this happened in the past 3 weeks, something like that. And a lot of people have come out and said that the new redesign is really confusing. And the CEO of Snapchat, Evan Spiegel, came out and said the reason why we redesigned it is to bring what your friends say to the top and what celebrities say to the back. And this is supposed to help improve your social experience and differentiate it from Instagram. And Kylie's one of these people that apparently got confused by the redesign, so she tweeted out saying that, she was wondering if she was the only one that was using Snapchat. And Snapchat's stock fell like 6.5%, 7%. I think 1.3 billion market cap is right. And ever since then, it's sort of hovered below where it was before.
Good. Good recitation of the facts. Yes, sir.
One other factor here is that on Sunday, she actually returned to Snapchat and snapped a video of of Stormy's foot.
Oh. These are important facts for the exam. You should be paying close attention.
So that might affect liability going forward, in that she has now returned, and I'm not sure how that affected the stock price, but just to keep in mind.
Huh. Is that a forward-looking statement? I got to think about that one. Okay. All right. So on its face, is there any securities law? Let's just start with the first question, okay? If I tweet something bad about a company that causes the price to fall, let's suppose that the price, just accept the assumption that the price here really fell because of her tweet. Now, that leads to disgruntled investors. Can I be sued under the securities laws, under the 33 or 34 Act, for saying something and doing nothing more than saying something that causes the price to fall? Who thinks I can be sued for something I say that causes the price to fall? Who thinks I can't? Okay, you don't think I can be. Well, so, all right, so let's think about this together. So, probably most of the time, absent some additional facts, there is not any basis for liability when you say something that causes the price to fall. One reason for that, at least we would think theoretically, is that Kylie might be right or might be wrong about the value of Snap in the same way that an analyst might be right or might be wrong, and when expressing their opinion about the firm, and that those mistakes that causes prices, well, let me just back up. Either the opinion about the firm is right That is, Snap is actually worth less than it was, and the market just hadn't really realized that. Or her opinion is wrong, and Snap is actually worth a lot more. And like an analyst who gets it right or gets it wrong, we think that those errors will tend to cancel out most of the time. That is, people shouldn't be more sort of, on average, pessimistic in their opinions that move prices than optimistic. And so, as a first sort of starting point, normatively, we shouldn't be too troubled by this, because there's probably other cases out there where people like Kylie, maybe one of her sisters, expresses a positive sentiment that causes a price to jump. And in any event, if they're wrong, those being wrong shouldn't happen more in one direction than the other. And so an investor who's diversified, so linking this back to our first week or two of material, that is an investor who is investing in both the snaps and the next case where the sentiment goes the other way, that investor will have greater volatility as a result of what Kylie did or said, or this, you could think of really any analyst or a person expressing an opinion. But that greater volatility should cancel out in both of those cases. So you might, tell the story that, well, positive sentiment, may not be shared so as often as negative sentiment. But remember, I'm just sort of applying the material from the first week. We said that you always want to adjust. You want to think of prices as adjusting for the average. So the way to think about it isn't like whether or not there's more or less positive sentiment in the market at any particular point in time, or whether Kylie is more or less likely to tweet negatively or positively, but rather to say, if we look at prices today, whatever we expect a change to be in sentiment, meaning if we had to predict, would there be another Kylie tweet tomorrow? What's the chance of that happening? Our best prediction that we could make today is that that sort of a tweet is just as likely to be positive as negative. And the reason that that's the best prediction we can make today is because if we thought that the best prediction we could make is that tweets like that would be negative, then we would discount prices accordingly until on a price-adjusted basis, that is, thinking not in terms of whether the sentiment itself will be positive or negative, but the change in value in our portfolio should be basically should have an average change of something like 0. That is, if we think, just to say this one more time so this is clear, if we think it's really, really likely that a random firm out there is going to get hit with a Kylie tweet that's negative, and that's the only kind of tweet that's out there, then we should just kind of sell all of our stocks a little bit, because we don't want to be hit with the Kylie tweet. We don't know which one's going to get it, but we know that there's some sentiment that's negative that's likely to come out. That means that our portfolio on average should be worth a little bit less than it is, because this is going to be destroying for some firm out there. And so we should sell. But having sold in anticipation of a Kylie tweet, we're then left with two possibilities, right? Either we've oversold, meaning the price that we sold to relative to the sentiment that is going to come out is too low, in which case we're essentially going to be pleasantly surprised. One way to think about this is like we've sold in anticipation of a Kylie tweet, we then wake up the next day and she doesn't tweet. Turns out that our portfolio is actually worth more than the price it started out that day. Nod your heads if this is clear. In other words, the fact that we discount prices based on some directional inference that we make on average then means that our unexpected surprise the next day can be positive as well as negative, and thus just as likely to be pleasantly surprising as disappointing. Does this make sense? So once prices adjust for expectations in markets, then risk is always symmetrical. Okay, does everyone see this? Question?
The issue that I'm having here is correlation,
Yeah.
where you could tell a nice story about she is the sole cause of this drop in stock prices if there was some liability.
Right.
But you don't necessarily know that, right? I mean, you'd have to prove that in order to, if she had any liability, right?
Well, the causation question here, I think, is pretty clear-cut. I mean, if I posted, you have to find some contemporaneous event that was happening at the same time that could be responsible for 7% decline in market value, which I'm sure is far in excess of what the market itself declined during that period, or even tech stocks. So technically, statistically, it's probably no doubt that a large part of that value of destruction, if not all of it, was caused by Kylie. The question is that something that should trouble us? And one immediate intuition you should have is that really we shouldn't be too troubled. Now, as a matter of securities law, you might say as a result, or you might try to rationalize the connection between these broader policy stories and what we see in the law by pointing out that there is, in fact, no basis for liability for Kylie under existing securities law. Okay? So neither under the 33 Act, this is not an IPO, but even if we're looking at the 34 Act, we haven't really done insider trading or 10B yet. We'll do that after spring break. But your intuition should be that this sort of thing is not illegal. And I like to start with kind of a reason why. Like, I want to try to understand why it might not be illegal before we really apply the black letter law, even though often you kind of go in reverse order, start with the law. But I want you to see that there's always an intuition here, right? So the intuition is like, no, it shouldn't be illegal because you can't really predict a Kylie tweet like that. Actually, analyst sentiment more generally should be not really predictable in its directional inference, because if everyone knows that tweeters are negative on average, that should be incorporated into prices, and so tweets should be just kind of mean zero. They should be like a bell curve around zero, just shocking prices one way or the other, but ultimately canceling out. For that reason, the most we get from Kylie's tweet is just an increase in market volatility. Again, not this particular tweet, but the most we get from behavior of this kind is an increase in market volatility on average. Now that, we should only worry about protecting investors from market volatility if that volatility is somehow linked to them having a good day or a bad day. Go back to our consumption conversation from the first week, where we said, look, the only reason that I care about a decline in value of 7% is if, like, I needed to retire with the Snap stock, right? So in this setting in particular, it's really hard to find a reason why consumption, right, individual investors' well-being is actually harmed by the Kylie tweet, because again, sentiment, we think on a daily basis, is likely to shock in both directions after having adjusted for pricing. And so unless in good times we think there's more likely to be one kind of sentiment than another, or that negative sentiment is likely to pile up in bad times, and that just doesn't seem to me to be the case here. This is a pure policy analysis of why we shouldn't be worried about the Kylie tweet. Now, as a matter of law, it actually is clear why. We haven't learned all the elements of insider trading liability, but if you remember from our hacking conversation, we need some kind of duty of confidentiality. There clearly was none. One way to view Kylie's tweet, just one second, one way to view Kylie's tweet is as actually new information, and that she's different than the analyst, and that Kylie is changing the value of Snap, and sort of like the cybersecurity firm that discovers the vulnerability and brings that information to the market. This is actually the sort of quintessential kind of information we want out there. Now, the question I want you to think about is, suppose we modified the hypothetical and inserted a key fact that Kylie had opened a short position in Snap prior to the tweet, which is what Matt Levine seems interested in thinking about. Now, would that statement be illegal? And now, that is a much trickier question, because it requires you to think, so as a matter of black letter law, your intuition is probably no, because there's no duty of confidentiality. Again, we haven't really gotten into insider trading doctrine, but you kind of have a sense that there should be some basis for more than this. But this is a good kind of question to test if you really understand the rationales behind securities law. Because whether or not there should be liability, for a speaker who has a short position in a stock is actually a tough, much tougher question than the more generic formulation of it. Yes, there was a question here. Let me make sure I get you checked off. Natasha? Yes. Yeah. So Natasha's question is, are informed traders better off than noise traders as a result of Kylie's tweet? Kylie's tweet is a very tricky hypothetical. You got to think about this one carefully. So the way to answer that question is kind of links to the, and why this is a good one, because it really probes your understanding of the economic framework. Okay, so the way to think about this question is not the realization of the problem in this particular case. Meaning, don't think about what happened to Snap as a result of Kylie's tweet. Think about the phenomenon. This goes back to our conversation from many weeks ago about trying to understand which direction informed trading is going to go. So just think about this phenomenon as shocking tweets, not in terms of what happened in the Kylie Jenner Snap case, but what would happen over and over and over again as tweets like this are produced. Remember that relative to current market prices, tweets like these should be shocking sentiment one way or the other. That is, they lead to an increase in volatility. Now, who benefits when there's an increase in volatility as between noise traders and informed traders? Well, informed traders, in the case of Snap, if you view Kylie's tweet or tweets like Kylie's tweet as similar to analysts, where what they're doing is actually just telling the market about an underlying fact about the firm that the market hadn't quite realized, then they're kind of functioning, these sorts of tweets, like informed traders do. You can think of Kylie and that setup as kind of like an informed listener. I mean, that's sort of what she is, right? She is waking the market up to the fact that Snapchat, the app, has gotten a lot worse than people realized. That's the quintessential role of an informed listener, not so different from like the researcher, the cancer researcher, right, who reads through the abstract, figures it out, and walks away with a better understanding of whether a particular biotech firm is likely to succeed on the merits. So under one construction of her tweet, that it is akin to information gathering about the app and distilling its poor functionality down to the market, we can view that as a kind of informed listening, which prompts the question under that path whether that informed listening should be subsidized in some way, whether we think it's good that people like Kylie walk away with some profit so that they go dig out information about apps that people aren't paying attention to, and that because that's costly, they're entitled to some sort of profit for that endeavor. Like the doctor reading the cancer abstract, that may justify not viewing the trading as illegal, at least theoretically. A lot of hands, hang on. Let me just finish the analysis. The other way to see it is Kylie is actually, well, I guess still under this view that it's sort of informed listening, you could take the other side and say, well, you know, maybe this isn't really necessary at all for this information to get out there. And maybe at the end of the day, this particular kind of tweeting when you have a stock position really doesn't reduce uncertainty. And this is similar to the disclosure debate that we were having about the value of certain kinds of information. Perhaps the sort of market sentiment doesn't reduce uncertainty around valuations and improve price accuracy. The other way to view the Kylie tweet is that it's actually new information about the firm, that because she's an influencer, now the value of Snap is just unequivocally lower. That actually is evenly distributed across noise traders and informed traders. I mean, in a way, you can think of informed traders as losing more systematically in that case, Natasha, to go back to your question, because if I thought if I had some information that Snap was actually going to have really high sales, and I opened a long position in Snap, I bought Snap stock expecting that it's going to go up because I knew that people were really liking Snapchat. Then Kylie puts out this tweet. I'm going to lose a lot more because I put a directional bet on my information that's since become stale, such that a noise trader who takes a zero position, meaning they're just as often trading in one direction as the other, would do better than an informed trader who went in one direction only to find out that the firm is worth a lot less than they thought. So it really depends whether this benefits noise traders or informed traders on how you characterize new information like this. Okay, questions? Sam.
Yeah, so I guess this is more of a comment. I guess what's concerning to me about this information, as opposed to, say, a hedge fund taking a short position and then publishing a report about information about the company, is that this information that she's revealing is actually more important because it's about her own future behavior. And so it's something that she's constantly in control of. And so if, 2 weeks later she's snapping her baby's foot, maybe that sends prices back up. And if she's able to sort of send false information, trade on that, and then alter her behavior later, maybe even trade on the upswing, if we allow that, then eventually that sort of information is going to become less trustworthy if we allow people to trade on it.
Great, excellent point. So Sam takes us one step further and says, listen, what if Kylie just systematically does this? Like, she sends out a bad tweet while she's shorting the firm. She sends out a positive tweet when she then buys the firm when it's, like literally, like sold the firm the day before this tweet, price went down, now it's cheap, buys the firm, tweets the foot, sells it. And this is Kylie's trading strategy. She has a lot of debt, this is how she stays afloat. Great. So an economist might wonder whether that could ever persist in the long term. Because if the market knows that, the market should immediately assume that Kylie's tweet says nothing about the value, or that there's a probability that it's motivated by this trading strategy, says nothing about the true value, and thus an arbitrager should rush in and buy the moment she makes the negative Snap tweet, like at least 1 second before her, bid the price of the stock back up, and essentially take those profits right away from her. So the financial economist will be very uneasy with that story persisting because it seems to reflect some kind of systematic mistake on the part of the market. I don't know whether that's actually likely to persist. I have a feeling that arbitrage on this kind of thing is really difficult, in part because, like, how many of you saw that tweet and thought, oh yeah, she's probably trading on it? Like, I don't know, she wouldn't have to disclose that trade. So there could be an inefficiency that persists for a very long time in the market. I would say that for our purposes, what I think is more interesting than that hypothetical guess, because we just don't know whether or not that this is sort of information, content-free information, right? It's not really information. We don't really know that. But what we can think about as legal folks, right, we can think about the legal implications of this and say, look, the real question, the more important normative policy question is how we think of Kylie, like in the economy. So it could be that this is a ephemeral sort of passing trading strategy that's going to disappear once the market figures it out. But let's just put that aside and suppose that it's either not or that doesn't happen very often. How should we think about tweets like these that can shock the value of firms one way or the other, shock prices? And one answer might be we can think of them like information gathering. And information gathering, which we know is costly, is something that we often want the law to subsidize, and particularly if we can articulate a reason why informed listening wouldn't happen absent some kind of subsidy. And we think that reducing risk for investors is actually furthered by subsidizing that sort of informed listening. Let me give you just to drive this point home, because I think this is a great, maybe this was the practice question. I don't know, I'll think of another one. But think about this, because these are points I like to see you engaging with. What would happen if Kylie didn't make that tweet? This is really where your intuition should be getting honed. You should start to think in these terms. What would happen if Kylie didn't make that tweet? Don't assume that the value of the firm would have been unaffected. Going back to the presentation of the facts here, if the app is actually getting worse, then the user base should decline at some point. And the value of Snap should decline at some point if the app is actually getting worse. So it's not a question of whether we let some investor walk away, investors as a group, some subset of investors, walk away with profits from selling Snap. Somebody is going to sell Snap at some point. It will either happen because Kylie made the tweet, it might be Kylie herself, it might be someone else, or it'll happen because 3 months from now, the user base starts declining because folks see that the app is not so great. Your intuition should immediately jump to that story because that's really the important question. By allowing Kylie or someone else to trade on Kylie's tweet, what we're doing is just accelerating the taking of those profits. We're shifting them distributionally. We're giving them to whoever had that short position or who sold off at the time of the tweet. Or in the case of Kylie, we might even be giving it to her if she's selling off. And taking it from other informed investors and noise traders who would be receiving that difference on average as time goes on by the steady, slow trickle of information. That choice, the choice of which investor to give the money to, is really what securities law is all about. It's wrong to say that somehow the law is prohibiting informed trading if it were to prohibit short positions by Kylie, or prohibit someone from buying put options on Snap stock like in our hacker trading. That's wrong. The law never, in a way, right, prohibits informed trading. Informed trading happens. The law prohibits informed trading in certain conditions, in certain settings, and thereby shifts and reallocates the profits from informed trading, hoping to achieve certain normative goals, like reducing uncertainty for investors. Is this clear to everyone? Nod your heads if you see this. So the really successful analysis here, I think, the right analysis, looks and says, wait a minute, what are the gains to society? What are the gains to the investing public but from allowing or prohibiting Kylie to short or someone to short that trade, that tweet, excuse me. Or another way to say it is, if we prohibit it, if we think the trade will always come along with the tweet, what are the gains to society, to the investing public, from prohibiting those kinds of tweets? Which might raise interesting First Amendment questions, if we could even prohibit tweets like that. But those are the questions I want you to be thinking about, because that's the real question. And you can think of securities law as a kind of tool that we're trying to use to shift these profits to one place or the other. And that when you look at a rule that seems to have open-ended liability, like, Omnicare, where you have a multi-factor test, you want to be thinking how the application of that multi-factor test is going to shift these profits in one way or the other. And that's really the key story. Yes? Sam. Yes.
So what if one were to look at this Kylie situation as her not revealing to the market that the app isn't as good anymore, but just that she's no longer going to use it, and so she's just going to draw less users to the app who only, or maybe a big part of the reason that they use the app is just to see her content.
Yeah. So how does that cash out? How do you think in this framework?
Well, it's different. In that situation, you can't really compare her to an analyst, let's say, because an analyst is bringing to the market information that presumably anybody could get, whereas Kylie is bringing information to the market that's just based on her preferences, and she's the only one that can really make that decision.
So should we let her trade in that case, then?
So in my analysis, there's a stronger reason there to not let her trade, because she has this unique information to herself, and she knows that she can, or she is impacting the stock price substantially just by choosing not to use the app. So she has extremely strong power in
Right.
the direction of the stock.
Does anyone disagree? Yeah, in the green. Yes. Yes.
So what if? But I feel like by that you could say the same thing, that a billionaire who shops extensively on Amazon shouldn't be allowed to, be a investor in Amazon because he personally could, or she could personally drive up the price just by making a lot of purchases.
Okay, but be more precise. The question is the speaking, right? So the tweet. So agree, we can take the baseline use as affecting the value of the firm. So I either use Amazon more, or I tweet, or I'm going to use Snapchat less. So that's analogous in the two settings. But the question is, do we allow the speaking? And I think the claim is for a particular reason that you're articulating, we might not want to allow the speaking. So there's three things. There's the behavior, the speaking, and the trading. Okay, so let's try to keep those separate. So the behavior can be analogous. The speaking, what does the speaking do? The speaking accelerates the price impact and may or may not be distinct from the behavior. And finally, the trading also accelerates the price impact. So the question is really, I mean, if she's not allowed to trade and she just speaks, does that somehow benefit investors? I mean, I could argue the other way and say, look, it could just be that it takes longer for the price to update to reflect the fact that she's unhappy with Snapchat. But you might, and this goes back to Sam's point, you might say, look, maybe this is all about kind of fraud concerns. Like at the end of the day, we don't really think that she's going to stop using Snapchat. And so what's bothering us about this is that this volatility allows for kind of too much short-term trading. Perhaps we think volatility in and of itself is undesirable, and we have to think about why. And so maybe if we think volatility is undesirable, maybe we want to use some of these as brakes on each other, right? So we'll allow the behavior. The millionaire can shop on Amazon. We'll allow the behavior. We'll allow the speaking, but we won't allow trading as kind of like a circuit breaker, kind of a resistance, right? Or we'll allow the trading, but we won't allow speaking. Now, as you know, for First Amendment reasons, it's a lot harder to prohibit speaking than it is to prohibit trading, right? Or maybe those of you who've taken First Amendment know this. Commercial speech, Caronia, you know these cases, some of you. Okay, it's very hard to prohibit speaking in the commercial speech context. It's a very stringent standard of review. So maybe that's one reason. This is an artifact of the law. Is this clear to everyone? So just think about it in this framework. Yes? Abe? Yeah. Great. Great hypo. What do you think? Great. Right. Well, for the supplier hypo to be analogous, you need it to not be material, non-public information obtained via a duty of confidence when we learn the elements of 10b-5. So let's suppose for this hypo that it's the supplier's intention that has yet to be communicated to the firm, or this is like the intention of a major buyer not to buy. So go back to our millionaire example. That's analogous. And the question is, could I short the company? Can a customer short the company prior to announcing that it's breaking off its relationship with that company? As a matter of law, if you can't identify some sort of, we'll get to this, breach of a duty of confidentiality under the classical or the misappropriation theory, it's not going to be insider trading. As a policy matter, which is what we're talking about now, it's a really interesting question. Again, think about the behavior, talking about it and trading on it as three different axes on which the price can change of the firm's stock. The question is, again, what kind of activity of this type, trading of this type, speech of this type, behavior of this type, are they likely to increase or decrease accuracy on average in the market, right? So if we look case after case after case, do we think it's a good idea from a price accuracy standpoint for suppliers to be announcing their intentions, for suppliers to be trading on their intentions? And the answer to that might turn to some extent on how comfortable we are with the possibility of fraud. Like we mentioned, maybe that's what's really bothering us about the Kylie case. It's just too many trading opportunities, too much volatility. And people don't like that for various reasons. But really, I think you'd have to find some basis for the volatility itself to be a concern for investors. At the end of the day, if some of your firms, announce supplier agreements and prices skyrocket, and other firms other suppliers announce that they're terminating supplier agreements and prices decline, if that process is accelerated because people get to trade on it up front, all that's happening is that your portfolio is just getting to its true value a little bit more quickly. And you might really like that, because it might mean that there's a buying opportunity that you can take advantage of today that otherwise you would have had to wait till tomorrow, or a selling opportunity that, in fact, that price is jumping faster, so you're going to walk away with more money today. Again, it has to be correlated with consumption. I'm going to keep driving that point. Otherwise, it's like a bet, a casino bet, and any given day, the announcement's going to go one way or the other. This is a review of week 1, week 2 material. Yes?
What if instead of just taking a short bet or something, she trades on volatility, or like an ETF with exposure to volatility, and so she purposely has tweets every other week, and the prices keep on going up and down? Would that open her up to any liability?
Good. Grace, right? Are you a econ major or?
No.
No? Okay. That's a sophisticated question. Okay. So Grace asks, did you work in finance? No? No background?
I trade.
You trade? Yeah. Okay, great. So we got a trader in the room. Great intuition. Okay. So Grace says, enough with this easy econ finance 101 stuff. Let's get to real markets. Okay. So it turns out that you can build a portfolio that does really well when there's volatility. All right. So how do you do that? It's a little complicated. You could just buy a put and a call option. Buy a put and a call that you match on certain characteristics, and you form what's called a straddle. There are what are called volatility swaps, where you form a derivative that the value of which is tied to volatility. You could just buy the VIX. You might have heard of the VIX, which is a volatility index, which is sort of like a series of straddles or a series of volatility-linked derivatives. So this is a great question. This is a really fun one. This really probes if you get it. Okay. So what if you profit by volatility? You don't even need to know the direction. You just have a volatility position. You're long volatility, and so then you're long volatility, so you go out and tweet a lot, hoping to induce tremendous volatility. You don't really care which way the market goes. Grace, what do you think? As a trader, what do you think would happen if that happened a lot? If Kylie did that a lot?
I think it would be good in the short term, and then you'd probably have to sell out, because eventually I feel like the market would catch up with what's going on.
What does it mean the market would catch up?
Maybe enough people would realize that the prices aren't actually changing by informed trading,
right,
but rather by this nonsense on Twitter.
Okay.
So then less people will keep on buying or shorting or whatever.
In response to the announcement.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another thing. That's true. So that's what we said earlier, but there's another possibility. Can you think of it? Go back to your question. What else might happen? Something else might get more expensive.
Oh, the actually investing in the ETFs.
Got it. Right. So think about this. So the more volatility there is in the market, the more expensive it's going to get to open a volatility position. Meaning, the lower the returns you can expect, the gains to trading that sort of volatility strategy. Yes?
If she's creating the volatility,
Yeah.
Bo,
Yes,
if she's
okay.
creating the volatility and then trading on it herself and profiting, could she be found liable for manipulation under 10b?
Generally, great question. We'll talk a little bit about market manipulation. Generally, open market purchases are not a basis for market manipulation. So you need some kind of trading pattern that is not indicative of true economic exposure. So suppose you're sort of front-running the market, meaning you've kind of set up your trades where you don't really have, and maybe this is a little related to Sam's story, where like you are, she's announcing, she's buying, and she's just kind of, it's like a pump and dump. She's trying to pump the price up, and then she never really has any long-term exposure, even like more than a day exposure to Snap. It's possible under relatively extreme hypos in that direction that you could get it. Generally speaking, most market manipulation cases involve order flow. Remember, go back to the order flow diagram that we looked at. They involve a lot of like buys. That actually just pumps the stock up, and then you sell, and you never had any intent to actually own the stock. Okay? Generally speaking, market manipulation requires some kind of trading behavior where your trading activity is disconnected from your ultimate economic interest. Announcements, by and large, speech, by and large, has not been embraced by the courts as giving rise to market manipulation activity. There is one exception, of course, for fraud liability. Okay, so anti-fraud is kind of held up by the courts, by the appellate courts, and in this lengthy commercial speech, First Amendment jurisprudence, the courts are kind of willing to accept restraints on speech that involve lie or deceit or misrepresentation of actual facts. But cases like these that involve sentiment, one way or the other, we have a real hard time constitutionally with saying we're not going to allow Kylie to express a negative opinion on Snap, even if she has a negative view of the stock. In fact, one way you could think about why that would be so troubling is in this kind of market for ideas, liberal folk theorem. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Like, I don't know what you learned in First Amendment. The classic rationale for the First Amendment and sort of hands-off is this idea that the truth emerges in the battle of adversaries. Is this like, some of you are nodding like you've taken this. Okay, so Tony Kronman in this classic, okay, it doesn't matter. So the idea is basically, if we let opinions go out there, she's really down on Snap, but I'm really high on Snap, and I think Snap is amazing. And the moment I see Kylie tweet that way, I'm going to get up there and I'm going to say, no, Kylie, you're wrong. And we're going to have this battle of adversaries, right? And the truth is going to emerge victorious out of the fire, right? And okay, like this is the classic, this is the folk theorem, right? The classic, or liberal folk, what is it called? Anyway, the classic, story that we should have kind of media freedom because we shouldn't be constraining viewpoints because viewpoints can offset each other and truth actually emerges when there's a lot of viewpoints. So from that angle, you would say, actually, allowing Kylie to trade in the direction of her beliefs is what we normatively want. Because we want people, imagine the opposite. Kylie opens a position, a long position in the firm, and shorts it on Twitter. Shorts it, negatively shocks it on Twitter, right? If anything, from a kind of First Amendment theory, you might say that's disingenuous. If, after all, she really believes Snap is bad, then put your money where your mouth is. Because if the rest of the market disagrees with you, in fact, the price will climb and she will pay. And that should serve as an incentive against misleading speech in a sense. So there's a way in which fraud, the ideas we have behind truth emerging and disagreement is kind of inconsistent with a prohibition on Kylie trading. Does everyone see this? I'm spending substantial time on this because I think this is the most interesting part of the class. Okay, there are some deep tensions here in securities law, and it's important to see those. All right, other questions? Does everyone get this? Okay. So you don't have to talk about truth emerging in the battle of adversaries on the exam, but it is a fun topic to think about, and I hope you walk out of here telling law firm partners that that's what you learned in securities law. Okay, Dropbox Inc. Dropbox Inc. File a Form S1. Yes. Isabel. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Great. That's a more like, textbook like law kind of question. So okay, so they didn't disclose a potential risk. How would we think about that? Let's apply what we learned a couple weeks ago. What do you think? Is it a material omission? Let's start there, right? Section 11, right? What's liability for a misstatement or omission in a prospectus? Well, we need some statutory basis. We might get to law today, more law. But we learned last week one basis is Section 11, right? So we need a material misstatement or omission for if they didn't disclose, right, that a celebrity could say something bad, we need, that is not a misstatement, that's an omission, right? We need some basis for that omission to be, for that to be actionable. We need a duty to speak, okay? And what do we know about duties to speak? Well, go back to Omnicare. Go back to, the starting point is there is no duty to, there is no general duty to speak. This is like an important point. There is no general duty to disclose a risk, like even a material risk. Even if they didn't, let's suppose that they thought it was material, that Kylie Jenner could say this. There is no duty to disclose a material risk on Form S1, unless there is an item number which required you to disclose material risks. And in fact, there is some language in Reg SK that requires disclosure of material business risks. So you might think of this as an omissions case where the problem is that they disclosed a particular set of risks and did not include. We're actually going to look at Dropbox, and we'll see examples of this. But just to complete Snap, so you might be able to tether it to that. Then the question is, what language are you going to tie the omission to? What language are you going to be able to say, this language, absent the celebrity risk disclosure, was misleading? So it could be, for example, a statement like, we believe that that celebrities love Snap, and that it's unlikely that any particular celebrity is going to emerge. I'm sure they would never say this, but we believe that there's great market support for Snap, great support for Snap in popular culture, and therefore we expect our business to grow. And you might pin it there and say, well, you believe there's great popular support for Snap, but that opinion, is not, just apply Omnicare, right? Apply the material we learned last week, under the circumstances which it's made, whatever. Okay, so you might, it depends on the facts you have. Another variant of that hypothetical is like, what if at the time they really didn't know that Kylie was unhappy, and then they hear 1 week prior to her tweet that she's unhappy? Do they have a duty to disclose, a duty to update, or a duty to correct that risk disclosure, right? I mean, it's kind of the same question, meaning is the failure to speak at some subsequent date giving rise to liability not under Section 11? Let's make sure this is clear, because it's not, in that case, an issue of a misstatement or an omission in the prospectus, but perhaps under 10b-5, or, it would have to be under 10b-5, pretty much. Okay, does this make sense? So that's the black letter law framework, right? And then, of course, since all these tests are wildly open-ended, you might, after doing your best with the facts, think about the marketplace for ideas. No. Okay. All right, let's talk about Dropbox. Dropbox filed an S1. Remember, we all know now what an S1 is, just a few days ago. And since, the real world is important, let's just look at a real world company that just went public, or began to go public. 500 million registered users, 180 countries, 1.1 billion in revenue, 11 million in paying users. 11 million in paying users, 500 million registered users, okay? 1.1 billion in revenue, 400 billion pieces of content. All right, the Dropbox S1 is really good to look at because this is actually what you will be doing as a securities lawyer if you are one, or if you ever interact with one. So there's an overview of the business. Remember, these sort of marketing type pitches are required to some extent by Reg SK. But what I want to draw your attention to is the section entitled, well, there's a couple sections I want you to focus on. This is in the summary, but there is a section called Our Growth Strategy. Let's look at that section, see if we can find it. There's a lot here on risks. Let's see, growth. Pretty sure it's in the 30s. Here we go, 94. Okay. So what does a forward-looking statement look like? It looks like the section called Our Growth Strategy in the Dropbox IPO. So what do I mean by that? Well, our growth strategy, increase adoption and paid conversion. We estimate that approximately 300 million of our registered users have characteristics that make them more likely than other registered users to pay over time. Does everyone see that? Our market opportunity. Our addressable market includes collaborative applications, content management, blah, blah, blah. IDC estimates that investment will total more than 50 billion. Okay, that's a borderline one. Let's see if we can find some more. Let's see. Pretty sure there was one back in the 30s. I was looking at before class. Okay. Well, here are some risk factors. Let's start at the beginning. A lot of risk factors. But before the risk factors, I could have sworn there were a few more optimistic statements. There we go. All right. Some more risk factors. Let's go up even further. Here we go. Paying users. Well, I could have sworn they were more optimistic. All right, let me tell you. Growth. Yeah, they're all negative, but I guess that's it. Oh, here we go. Here's the one. Yeah, okay. We believe that a large majority of individual customers use Dropbox for work, which creates an opportunity to significantly increase conversion to Dropbox Business team offerings over time. Okay, that's another forward-looking statement. And I guess there aren't really that many in this one. All right, so there's a couple. Now, there's a lot more about risk factors, like you saw. And let's go back up to the top so you can see the risk factor disclosure. All right, so one point that a lot of the media hit on is that, here we go, risk factors beginning on page 15. There we go. Okay, our business depends on our ability to retain and upgrade paying users, and any decline in renewals or upgrades could adversely affect our future results of operations. Oh, here's one. We seek to expand within organizations through viral means by adding new users, having workplaces purchase additional products, or expanding the use of Dropbox. So you see that there's a forward-looking statement that then is often followed by a qualification. And the concern is kind of this one, that there's a risk that they don't want to be held liable for under Section 11. If our paying users fail to renew or cancel their subscriptions, or if we fail to upgrade our paying users to premium offerings, our business results of operations or financial conditions may be harmed. All right, you can go through this, but I just wanted to give you a few examples. Many of our users initially access our platform free of charge. As of December, this is a fact. We served over 500 million registered users, but only 11 million paying users. A majority of our registered users may never convert to a paid subscription to our platform. So what are they doing with these disclosures? Okay, they're trying to preempt concerns like Isabella's that you didn't include a particular risk, and therefore there's a basis for some kind of implied Section 11 liability. All right? So I'm just trying to give you some examples from a real IPO. What are some other interesting characteristics of the Dropbox IPO? Well, it's great to look at their corporate governance structure. Many of you are familiar with this from the tech sector. Our Class A common stock, which is the stock we are offering in this offering, has 1 vote per share. Congratulations. Our Class B common stock has 10 votes per share. Of course, who holds the 10-to-1 Class B? Let's see, our co-founders, our Class B common stock, but there's this very nice breakdown, see if I can find it, of who actually owns the Class B. These are very long. I don't know. It turns out it's all the founders. They have, oh, here we go. There we go. Beneficial owners of shares. These, by the way, are cool tables you find in a lot of securities disclosures that give you all sorts of fun information. Any of you have sort of, want to write a note that uses empirical data, pulling info out of these tables is really cool. Class B shares, you can see these are the founders, Andrew Houston and Arash Firdausi, and they have a massive amount of Class B shares. All executive officers and directors as a group hold 35% of the Class B shares, and since those have 10-to-1 voting power, you will never be able to take over Dropbox. Okay, slight detour, but I think that was just worth pointing out. You can dig through the Dropbox S1. That's what you prepare as a securities lawyer. All right, any other questions on the material we've covered so far? Now, in the last 15 minutes of class, let's just review. So Section 11, right, we said it's liability for what? Liability for misstatements or omissions in the prospectus, in the registration statement. The registration statement. Well, let's look. So we went through Section 11 in painstaking detail. A couple of you asked about causation, and so we remember there's this reverse causation, so you can show that the price declined for some other reason, but you don't have to prove causation. So we've done Section 11. Okay, it's for liability for misstatements or omissions in the registration statement. Section 12, all right, 12A1. Any person who offers or sells a security in violation of Section 5. We learned Section 5. Let's just skip down here. So any person who offers or sells a security in violation of Section 5, just forget the or, shall be liable to the person purchasing such security from him, who may sue either at law or in equity in any court of competent jurisdiction to recover the consideration paid for such security with interest thereon, less the amount of any income received thereon upon the tender of such security, or for damages if he no longer owns the security. What is that? Well, you saw in the casebook, it's a rescissionary right. It's a right of rescission. For what? For sales in violation of Section 5. Sales of unregistered securities, by definition. Remember, we learned that it is a violation of Section 5 to sell a security for which the registration statement has not been declared effective. It is further a violation of Section 5 to offer to sell a security for whom a registration statement has not been filed. Therefore, offering or selling a security in violation of Section 5 gives rise to a right of rescission. That is, as a buyer, you are entitled to sue the seller and say, I want my money back. Now, I want my money back, means I'll give you the security back, but the security is probably worthless in this case, or worth less than what you paid for it, or else you wouldn't be demanding it back, right? Your money back. If the security went up in value, why would you return the security in exchange for less money? Okay? So in these stories, the security has always gone down in value. And in Pinter Vidal, in the Pinter case, the question that was asked there is whether buyers who sort of participate in a transaction, in the purchase of unregistered securities, securities sold in violation of Section 5, whether those buyers can sue not only the seller, who was Pinter in that case, but also another individual who happened to promote the securities or offer those securities for sale. And what happened in Pinter Vidal, if you remember from the case, I'm just saving time here, is that Pinter wanted to basically wanted to raise money and sold interest to Dahl. Dahl then went out and told to some friends, hey, I've got this investment opportunity, won't you come along? And they invested as well. Everyone lost money, and the question was who can get sued, okay? And so, of course, everyone could sue Pinter, the seller, but they weren't so happy with Dahl either, because Dahl basically told them about this opportunity. And so the question is, there's no doubt that if Dahl were selling the securities, that would be a clear violation of Section 5, and Section 12 would give right to rescission. So if this was a broker transaction where Dahl bought the securities from Pinter and then resold them to these other investors, clearly there's a chain of title that would give rise to Section 12 liability for every seller in the chain of title. Does everyone see that? Sorry about that. So it's clear, all right, that if Dahl were in the chain of title, Dahl would be liable. The question was, should Dahl be liable, should we hold Dahl liable for promoting the securities or for facilitating their sale even if he was not actually holding title to the securities? And the court goes through this lengthy discussion of the sort of definition of sale and whether it requires a chain of title. Remember, just for time's sake, cutting in the bottom lines, the court concludes that passing the chain of title is not necessary. So brokers and dealers, or those who are involved in the chain, in the transaction, in the transfer of title, but did not hold title themselves to the securities, can be held liable under 12A1. However, what happened? Mr. Dahl got off the hook, right? Why did he get off the hook? Who remembers? Who remembers? Yes, Michael.
There was no financial gain for promoting it?
Yeah, exactly. So he wasn't really a broker or dealer. He was sort of just trying to help his friends. And the court is very concerned that friends will give friends stock tips and, God forbid, we chill that activity. So let's just let everyone tell each other about investment opportunities and not worry about Section 12 liability. All right, maybe you get them under 10b-5 or some other, but even then it's not clear, probably not. So, so what about remote sellers? Okay, so I guess I was a little imprecise. So there's no doubt that the ultimate buyers could have sued Dahl. If they were buying from Dahl, they could have sued Pinter because I believe he served as the issuer in this case. So that's, I guess, a technical question. Generally, you can sue your immediate seller or the issuer under 12A1. Intermediate, you can't sort of demand in a discovery process, like proceeding from the NASDAQ, every other buyer and seller in the chain and then just start randomly like suing them, right? So you can sue the person who you bought it from, you can sue the issuer because they also sold the shares, but that's it, okay? There's no, like, I'm now going to sue every single person who transacted in the security because each one of them were also a seller, but not to me, right? So, but in this hypo, the buyers could sue Dahl. I'm pretty sure they could sue Pinter if Pinter were the issuer. That's a question. Maybe Pinter isn't the issuer because there's a shell company formed. So maybe not. But they could certainly sue Dahl, who could then sue Pinter. So if you have 3 people involved, the chain is very easy to establish. It gets much trickier, of course, in anonymized markets. This should be pretty straightforward. Any questions on 12A1? This is not complicated. Everyone sees it? Okay. 12A2, right of rescission for making a misstatement. So just look here, any person who offers or sells a security, whether or not exempted by the provisions of Section 3 other than paragraphs 2 and 14, so you can read the casebook. This is 12A2 applies to exempt securities by and large, except for, what is 2 and 14, the intrastate? Anyway, you can look this up. So there's the two exemptions that you get out of 12A2 liability. Otherwise, all offers and sales of securities under 12A2 are, in fact, a basis for liability, whether the securities are exempt or not. By interstate commerce, by means of a prospectus or oral communication. Let me just highlight that, which includes an untrue statement of material fact or omits to state a material fact necessary in order to make the statements in light of the circumstances under which they were made not misleading. And who shall not sustain? Okay. So anti-fraud liability, but anti-fraud liability that wears a sort of strict liability hat, because we're not in the scienter land of 10b under the 34 Act. Instead, what we're looking for is a misstatement or omission in the prospectus or oral communication. The question arose, well, it has to be a prospectus or an oral communication in the process of offering or selling a security, right? So the question arose in the Gustafson case. You saw, what does prospectus mean? The court sort of bitterly divided over this. I didn't really get why it was that important, but was it Ginsburg who's just furious? I can't remember. But, they're not. Sometimes. Okay, so what is prospectus? Prospectus, the majority holds, is actually a registration statement issued by an issuer, which kind of collapses 12A2 and Section 11 liability. I don't really see, other than the applicability to exempt securities, there isn't much different between the two. Perhaps maybe you can play with this exercise of reasonable care should not have known of such untruth and omission, and maybe try to argue that the due diligence exemptions under Section 11 are different from the reasonable care exemption under 12A2, but I don't think you're going to be very successful. I think basically there's a tendency to view all this as the same thing. Okay? Essentially, nowadays, 12A2 is just going to cover the same stuff that Section 11 covers, except for perhaps the exempt securities difference. Okay. The issue, of course, at Gustafson was that prospectus is defined in the statute much more broadly to include any written communication, and it just seemed that in that case there was a contract, and the question was, should a contract, is a contract a written communication? No, it's not a prospectus. Dancing on the head of a pin. Okay, so let's move on to 17A. 17. It shall be unlawful for any person in the offer or sale of any securities, including security-based swaps or any security-based swap agreement, by the use of any means or instruments of transportation or commerce in interstate commerce, or by use of the mails or emails, directly or indirectly, to employ any device, scheme, or artifice to defraud. Okay, this is 17A is a copy-paste pretty much of 10B, which we haven't done systematically yet. But 17A is just a general anti-fraud prohibition, but it does require what? Well, it prohibits employing any device, scheme, or artifice to defraud, and to engage in transactions which operate as a fraud or deceit upon the purchaser. Bottom line, we haven't done 10B yet again, but bottom line, there's going to be a mens rea requirement here. We're going to be needing some sort of special intent, some kind of scienter, some kind of fraud. And the fact that it's 17A is just because, as opposed to 10B under the 34 Act, is really just because 17A has in mind the sale, the offer or sale of securities, and thus the issuing of securities, right? The sale of securities by an issuer in exchange for capital, not the trading of securities that occurs under the 34 Act, or that the 34 Act had in mind. And so 17A is really formally, there's one distinction, which is that it involves offer or sale as opposed to purchase or sale under 10B, and thus is limited to sales formally and offers to sell formally. But just the way to think about that is it's kind of arising in this framework where we have issuers selling shares in exchange for capital, right? And the sale of shares in exchange for capital is the quintessential transaction contemplated by the 33 Act. And so, in fact, it doesn't really make sense to talk about anti-fraud liability against a purchaser in the context of the 33 Act. Okay, any questions on Section 11, Section 12, Section 17A of the 33 Act? Civ Pro, securities law. Yes, Magdalena. Well, you could do both. I mean, yeah.
It's part of the registration statement, right? So maybe it's maybe more advantageous for defendants to be sued under 11 because they have the due diligence defense, whereas if you don't have that defense under 12. But at the same time,
well, they have that reasonable care, which has been construed as bringing in all the due diligence.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion whether
right.
they're the same or not. I don't think there's total consensus.
There isn't consensus, but
As a
yeah.
plaintiff, how would you make this decision to sue under 11 or 12?
I'd sue under both.
Under both?
Yeah. I mean, you can allege both in your complaint.
What are the advantages of either?
The nuances that we've been... So if you have exempt securities, you can bring under 12A2, right? Because there's a specific carve-out for exempt, like it applies to exempt securities. You would need a 12A2, you would need an offer or a sale. Yes, you could think of settings perhaps where that doesn't happen, maybe. I don't know. But this is a violation of Section 5. Sorry, that's the 12A1. But you're in the setting of an offer or sale, and you're looking for a misstatement in the process of the offer or the sale. Oh, I don't know. Would be very hard to think of a setting where Section 11 was not implicated other than an exempt security. I can't think of one. Yeah. All right, 18 of the 34 Act. We'll wrap up with this. So, again, we've sort of left the 34 Act for after spring break. It's much more fun, and it's better weather, and we can talk about more cool insider trading hypos. But let's go down. I can find 15B, 22, I can find 18. Maybe I'll just search for 18. Does that work? Maybe Sec 18. Oh, look at that. That's cool. All right. Here we go. Any person who shall make or cause to be made any statement in the application report or document filed pursuant to this title, filed being the key word, if it's misleading or omission in light of the, okay, you're on the hook. Remember filed versus furnished? So the modern meaning, as opposed to the original intent of the framers, of filed versus furnished is that you can do things like give an annual report and say it's furnished and not filed, and therefore not subject to Section 18 liability. And that is it. So remember, historically, last note to wrap up, historically, there was a time when a lot of securities disclosures were given directly to investors. And the idea was that if you gave if you communicated directly to your investors, like via the mails, then you wouldn't be sort of held to the same standard of liability as if you filed those with the SEC. Over time, with the advent of EDGAR and online securities disclosures, those distinctions collapsed. All disclosures were made on the internet. More recently, there's been a trend towards using this term, filed versus furnished, to exclude certain filings from the scope of what is filed by calling them furnished instead of filed. And with that tongue twister, I will see you tomorrow morning, 10:40. Office hours, remember, tomorrow afternoon there's an admitted students event I have to go to, but I'll be around before and after. Like 1:30 to 2:30, 1:15 to 2:45, and 4:15 to 6 or so. Yeah. Oh, yes, thank you. Totally forgot. 106 tomorrow. There's an admitted students event here in this room. So 106 tomorrow. Thank you. Yes. Yes. No worries. I don't know if I didn't write about it, but don't worry about it. Yeah. Well, all of them are recorded. What is the reason you're missing? Okay, a doctor's appointment. Like, is it like just a regularly scheduled, or are you sick or something?
I can only see people like once a week. So
Okay. All right, it's an edge case. I'll let it go this time. Generally, I tell people, like, if you're sick, I'll give you the recordings, but I prefer that, like, if you can schedule appointments around the class.
I wanted to do it last week, but I knew you were not going to be here.
Yeah,
Last week.
it didn't work out. Yeah. No worries. All right, no worries. Okay. All right, I'm happy to give you. Just remind me. No problem. Oh, take your time. Yes. No. Yeah. Did I not send you the recording? No. I'll send it to you. No. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And informed listening in particular. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. That's right. Don't worry about it. Yeah. Exactly. 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 You got it. But get better. I'll send you the recording. Don't feel like you have to come. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. Yeah. Just recover. Yeah. No problem.